Ladies and gentlemen, I've been reading up on the history of victory gardens here in the US and just had this urge to sit down and talk about it for a bit because what I found really blew my mind, and I think more people need to hear about this, know about this. So let me preface what I'm about to say with that I really think we need to bring victory gardens back and get people excited about growing their own food again. I truly believe that this could be one step toward making our society more healthy and the individual, of course. So let's talk about what victory gardens are, and then I kind of want to also talk a bit about why I think they would be beneficial. And oh, by the way, I'm not sure if I really like the name victory gardens that much. It just sounds, it's like too war focused, right? I don't know. I feel like we can come up with a way better name. They used to be called Liberty Gardens, actually, which I like that a lot more. But in today's day and age, like the modern era, I think I'd call them like maybe resilience gardens. Because for me, it always comes back to our mission here with the Year of Plenty, which is help build more resilient people through food, right? So I'd love to hear your ideas, though. You know, if you're watching on YouTube right now, definitely drop some name ideas in the comments below, because maybe there's even a better one than resilience gardens. So let's start with what victory gardens even are, because, you know, if you're a gardener, homesteader, you've probably heard about this, but not everyone watching or listening might know about victory gardens. So I found this really cool article by theworldwar.org. It's by the National World War I Museum and Memorial. This article is called Victory Gardens in World War I, Sow the Seeds of Victory. And they had some really good historical facts in here about victory gardens in World War I, and I really enjoyed reading the article. And I want to give you a quick just overview of what they talked about and take you back in time. So World War I was raging and Europe was running out of food. And mostly they were running out of food because land was getting destroyed, farmers were fighting in the war, and as a result there were a lot of hungry mouths to feed. A lot of hungry people, obviously. So that then beckons the question, where would a place as large as Europe during World War I get all their food? Where would it be coming from in such dire times of war? Well, you might have guessed it already. The answer was the United States, of course. So a bit before the US entered the war in 1917, there was a wealthy man named Charles Lathrop Pack. I think he was a timberman. And there were some others with him that formed the National War Garden Commission, which that'd be cool to see today. Like I can't imagine us forming any sort of National Garden Commission, but hey, I'm all for it. So the goal of this National War Garden Commission was to aid with the food shortages in Europe, and this commission promoted growing vegetables and gardens nationwide all over the US, and they even went so far as to promote gardening as a civic duty. It was that hardcore. Like, you know, it's kind of cool that it became this super patriotic thing during that time. And the US government even went around and gave out pamphlets to teach beginners about gardening, seed saving, storage, and canning of their harvests, preventing food wastes and soil and all that good stuff. So in this article, let me go down and find, here's a picture of that pamphlet. So the pamphlet says Victory Edition 1919, War Gardening and Home Storage of Vegetables is the title, published by the National War Garden Commission, Washington, D.C. And it's got a picture of, like, I think it's George Washington with the flute and all these youngsters with gardening equipment in their overalls marching after him. Super cool art on there. I really like it. And this was given out to people all over the U.S. And get this, women and kids were so involved in growing veggies in their local communities when this whole thing was happening, this whole victory garden phenomenon, that they were called soldiers of the soil, which I think is a genius name. Like, I kind of want to be a soldier of the soil, personally. Can we bring that back, please? And to quote from the article, I think it says it down in here. Right here. School children known as soldiers of the soil contributed 3 million new garden plots in 1917 and more than 5.2 million the following year, according to History, the History Channel, that is. How wild is that? That's crazy. That's a lot of new gardens, millions of gardens. So, as a result of this, tons of food was sent to Europe during World War I. But anyway, once the ball got rolling and people really began to see the value of these victory gardens, they sprang up everywhere. I mean, I'm talking about people's backyards, of course, but also like empty lots, in yards of businesses, schools, and even the White House lawn had a victory garden. So there was just that much hype around it. And as a result of millions of people getting out there and gardening, there was millions of tons of produce produced here in the U.S. And all of that was sent to Europe during World War I. So it was a very successful campaign, to say the least, and really made gardening a cool thing to do back then. And I think about the impact that had. We now had an army of people in the U.S. that were super self-sufficient and knew how to produce nutrient-dense food all by themselves, right in their backyards. And what was even cooler is that this victory garden phenomenon carried then into World War II. People saw what was possible, and as a result, World War II brought people back into their gardens again. So this time, though, a large amount of the food that was grown to feed Americans at home instead of just sending it all to Europe. So let's look at some crazy numbers, because these were the most shocking to me. Like, when I saw this, it was crazy to learn. Let me pull it up here. Here's another article. This one is by the Smithsonian Gardens, and it's called Victory Garden at the National Museum of American History. And they had some crazy numbers in here. So here we go. Victory Gardens by the numbers. And this is for World War II now. So they said roughly 1/2 of all American families had a victory garden during World War II. Let that sink in. Half of American families had one. There were at least 20 million victory gardens covering more than 20 million acres of American soil by 1943. Holy crap, that's a lot of land. And then 40% of the nation's produce was supplied by victory gardens by 1944. That's almost half of the nation's food supply, all coming from victory gardens, from community efforts. What? That's nuts. And then we had American families had grown approximately 8 million tons of food by the time the war ended in 1945. So that's just wild. I think that's pretty amazing to hear about all that. Because I've talked to many people about the idea of like encouraging gardening more aggressively again, like they did during the times of the war. So, that it can become part of the zeitgeist of our modern era, because I think we need it. And most people, I talk to are kind of Debbie Downers about it, and they say that, it's just not possible. It's not going to happen. But history shows us that it is possible, and this is like only, 100 to, 70 years ago. So I think it clearly shows that if people care about it enough, it can be done. And there's so many benefits that come with people growing gardens again, both for the individuals and for families and our society as a whole. So especially in today's day and age where many of us, just don't have the skills anymore to grow food and are dependent on grocery stores and restaurants to keep us fed, I think we need gardening skills more than ever. And there's a great meme. I don't have it on me right now. I could go through my phone and look for it, but it's basically like, an image. The top of it is someone accepting, I think, some fast food through the drive-through window, and the bottom is someone working in a garden, and it says, "Convenience is skills lost." And I think that is so true. Like, the more we just have this convenience economy, the more we're losing skills that have been around forever and that are really necessary for societies to thrive. And I just mentioned the benefits, and I think it's important to kind of take a closer look at those, because if I'm going to say that, there's all this good stuff with gardening and all that, so I think I should also kind of back up my points a bit with what I mean there. And I think we do need to get these benefits across to people for them to jump aboard this ship, this gardening ship, or this just like food resilience movement. And they used to have that War Garden Commission that I talked about earlier that was out there spreading the word. But that's us now, you, me, us who already grow our own food and forage and hunt and fish and understand the benefits of being involved in sourcing your own food. We need to go out there and show people how rewarding growing a garden can really be for them to really wake up and jump on board, in my opinion. So the first benefit I see in this are more resilient local communities and rural economies. And this kind of goes with, what I was just kind of hinting at. But our food security depends right now on big corporations and global trade. So there's so much unpredictability with that system due to geopolitical issues, wars, shifting climate patterns even, mass soil erosion, huge issue, and all these other issues with the system. Like it's a very shaky thing, and I don't think we can just rely on all that to work. And I think a lot of people have woken up to this really because of the food supply shortages that we saw in like 2020, 2021, when, you went to the grocery store and fresh produce shelves were empty. I think all of us remember this because it's pretty new still. Like this wasn't that long ago. So hopefully all still remember that. And why should we depend on distant food supplies if more of it could be grown in our homes and stored at home and be easily accessible for you, your neighbors, etc. If more of us knew the skills to grow our own food, I think we'd be in a much better place and much better off in times of economic hardships and other, global crises and whatnot. And just more people would have access to quality food, especially those that can't really afford nutritious food when the economy is doing bad. And I think it would also just definitely make our communities way more resilient and provide this common purpose. And community building is really this huge added benefit here. I think we would see a lot more neighbors coming together, maybe even creating shared gardens, because that's what was happening during the times of the wars, the big wars, when the victory gardens were a thing. Gardens where people work together and share information, making really the gardening success easier for everyone to achieve. And that could then even lead to trading and bartering, just like in the good old times. I love trading and bartering. This way, it's not just super overwhelming and a full-time job either, because if you're going to have to grow every variety of vegetable out there yourself, if you've tried to do that, which most new gardeners try to do, including myself, that can get overwhelming super quickly, and it's just not easy to do. But if, let's say, for example, you really love growing squash, but you don't really want to deal with corn, then you could make a deal with your neighbor where they grow the corn, you grow the squash, and at the end of the season, you guys just barter, you switch, and you kind of trade accordingly and plan for that accordingly. Or you could even exchange gardening tools so that everyone can garden on more of a budget. I think that would be huge, because it's kind of sad. I feel like knowing your neighbors in today's day and age again, it's just a rare thing. It's something we're really lacking as a society. I don't know all my neighbors, and I bet you guys don't know all the neighbors within your vicinity. At least the more people, there's a lot of people I talk to who don't have any relationship with their neighbors at all. But gardening and food bring people together. It's always been that way, and it always will be that way. Plus, on top of that, I think another benefit we would have are more nature lovers and biodiversity in our local ecosystems. If more people really got into gardening and had these resilience gardens or victory gardens, whatever you want to call them. I think it's fair to say that people who start gardening just tend to start caring about their land more and the land around them, the public lands, their neighbors' lands, and more people learning about the land and using it to produce healthy food can lead to healthier habitats and biodiversity. Right now, the most biodiversity you see in people's yards are the weeds that they then go and spray to death. like the few dandelions or salsify that pop up in the spring. And if you're a forager, you know that, those aren't even weeds, but they're really delicious wild foods. But at least in my neighborhood, almost all lawns that my neighbors have are nothing but grass. There's absolutely close to zero biodiversity there. Zero. And that's not good for ecosystems. And that's not good for animals, like little pollinators and whatnot. So now I do think for us to do this successfully, though, and in a way that would actually improve biodiversity and create more healthy ecosystems, we would have to promote gardening that is, regenerative, that's using organic and maybe permaculture principles, which I know is often a lot easier to do on a small scale homesteading than on big farms anyways. And I say that because whenever you say, people need to do more permaculture and the farmers need to do more organic stuff, people say, well, you can't scale it. And to some extent that's true, but like on a home garden basis, I think it's a lot easier to do those things than, if you're trying to grow food for big grocery stores and whatnot. So that way we can also kind of work on improving the soil health in more areas and just get more people to become aware of that, because that's a major issue with how we grow our food right now. Like the soil erosion that's happening, I think should be on top of everyone's mind. It's one of the most, how should I say this? It's definitely one of the biggest issues that we're facing, biggest threats that we're facing as a world, really. The amount of soil that's eroding, quality soil that we can actually grow stuff in. And then also with regenerative practices, we would achieve more nutritious food. That's the goal. There are actually studies that show that nutrients in our food have kind of decreased over the decades. And some scientists and farmers attribute it to the way we produce food these days, like how produce is grown under the industrial agricultural system. And if you've never heard about this is pretty wild too. Let me pull up a little study on that, or an article here. So this is an older article from 2004, but it says that study suggests nutrient decline in garden crops over the past 50 years. And I've talked about this before on some of the Year of Plenty podcast episodes. But it says here that according to Davis, who is the professor who conducted this study, Dr. Donald Davis from, I think it is, where is he from? Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. So let's see. Where is he from? So it says here, let me just read it. The study, based on U.S. Department of Agriculture data, will appear in the December issue of the Journal of American College of Nutrition. So this study is already out and has been since 2004. But it says that its lead author is Dr. Donald Davis of the university's Biochemical Institute of the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. Yeah, but which university? Oh, University of Texas. Okay. And it says that according to Davis, establishing meaningful changes in nutrient content over a 50-year time interval was a significant challenge. The researchers had to compensate for variations in moisture content that affect nutrient measurements and could not rule out the possibility that changes in analytical techniques may have affected results for some nutrients. Okay, I get that. But it says here, quote, that it is much more reliable to look at average changes in the group rather than individual foods due to uncertainties in the 1950s and 1999 values. Considered as a group, we found that 6 out of 13 nutrients showed apparently reliable declines between 1950 and 1999. These nutrients included protein, calcium, phosphorus, iron, riboflavin, and ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C. The declines, which range from 6% for protein to 38% for riboflavin, raise significant questions about how modern agricultural practices are affecting food crops. We conclude that the most likely explanation was changes in cultivated varieties used today compared to 50 years ago. Davis said during those 50 years, there have been intensive efforts to breed new varieties that have greater yield or resistance to pests or adaptability to different climates, but the dominant effort is for higher yields. Emerging evidence suggests that when you select for yield, crops grow bigger and faster, but they don't necessarily have the ability to make or uptake nutrients at the same faster rate. And I know this is just one study. I know it's one of the bigger ones that is always talked about, but I also found this scientific review in Hort Science, the journal Hort Science, and it's called Declining Fruit and Vegetable Nutrient Composition. What is the evidence? And this goes over a few studies. So if you want to dig deeper into this, I highly recommend that you check this out and read through it. But yeah, this is pretty wild if you ask me. The fact that some of the main crops that we're eating today have really just dropped in nutrients. And it seems like the evidence is there to say that this is true, that this is a real thing. But let's move on to more benefits of Victory Gardens, though. So I want to get through some more here. So we talked about the development of stronger local economies and community building, with people doing community gardens, sharing their tools, sharing their knowledge, and that then leading to just societies or local economies being stronger and having more food readily accessible. But, we also need to talk about the personal development of the people who are actually gardening, right? What do I mean by that? Well, I think it would lead to more healthy people, healthy individuals, people with better physical and mental health, both. And I think we would see a lot less health issues in our society, which, unless you've been sleeping under a rock, the U.S. is not a healthy society at all, and it's getting worse and worse. And if you dig into it, there's definitely some scientific evidence to back this up too, what I just said. So tons of Americans, if you think about it, are already severely deficient in some key nutrients, like magnesium is a big one. And, those nutrient deficiencies are just one of the things that are contributing to all sorts of health issues in our society today. And a lot of that comes from not being educated about food, I think, and cooking, in my opinion. I think that is why we have nutrient deficiencies and also just more health issues, because, people are out there, they're just buying mostly processed food and going and eating at restaurants. They're not out there really growing their own food or getting to meet their food, getting closer to their food source. But if you are growing your own food, you're almost kind of forced to become more educated about it, because now you have all these healthy ingredients you got to harvest and that you're putting work into. And what I usually see is that an interest in cooking, homemade meals kind of follows that. Like people who start to go foraging, people who go fishing and hunting, start growing their own food, people who go talk to their farmers more, they just are more pumped about cooking themselves too. And then I think, then maybe we can actually lower that daunting number that I like to share in the podcast, which is that and this is crazy, but 60% of the average American's diet consists of ultra-processed food nowadays. The quote-unquote food, right, that is rich in calories but devoid of the needed nutrients, those nutrients that, people are getting more and more deficient in. This is a main reason why we're just not eating the right foods. And gardening, again, will lead to better diets, in my opinion. That's my opinion, obviously. And I think just along with better nutrition and increased exercise, you would also learn skills that make you really feel empowered. If you garden, you know how empowering it is. If you forage, you know how empowering it is. And I would argue that empowerment really, really improves mental health. That's just an awesome added benefit. And you're also engaging with nature. And we know that people who regularly engage with nature tend to have better mental health. Plus, there's also a real argument for it being more cost effective to gardening, especially over time. If you share knowledge and use the tools with your neighbors and you start acquiring your gardening tools and you just become more efficient as a gardener, I think there is definitely some cost effectiveness that you can see there. And because, hey, food prices are getting more and more expensive. Like with inflation, I don't think anyone who's actually out there buying food at the grocery store would argue against that. It's kind of getting nuts out there. But overall, I think it would lead to a stronger, resilient people and individuals, you would want to have in your inner circle, like people you want to have around. Like when people always tell me that if the S hits the fan, if the shit hits the fan, I'm gonna call you. I'm gonna have you in my list. But my answer is always like, yo, I'm gonna have to be looking for myself and my family. Like, you need to start learning these skills yourself, because it's just something we can't afford not to know anymore. Now, the last big benefit, though, is the cultural preservation that I want to talk about. And, if more people got into gardening and if we had this victory garden movement again, I think it would ensure that traditional food ways and skills stick around, because people practice them and they understand the value of those skills, right? So let's not forget also on top of that, the amazing heirloom varieties of veggies and crops, right? That's part of the cultural preservation, in my opinion. We still have a lot of them today. I'm a gardener who tends to go out and try to find these really cool heirloom varieties or varieties of plants that are more adept to my local region here, right? But even though we still have some of them today, it's nothing compared to what we used to have. The diversity in veggies and fruits in varieties, has really continued to decline under the industrial ag system, where we only grow, a few specific high yield varieties at scale. And there's some good data to back this up too. Let me switch to that. I found this crazy article by the FOA. Let's see. This should be pulled up now so you can see it. Yeah, by the FOA, the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, big farming, gardening organization from the government. And they say here that what is happening to agro biodiversity? That's the title of this document. And they say that locally, varied food production systems are under threat, including local knowledge and the culture and skills of women and men farmers. With the decline, agrobiodiversity is disappearing. The scale of the loss is extensive. With the disappearance of harvested species, varieties, and breeds, a wide range of unharvested species also disappear. And they say here that more than 90% of crop varieties have disappeared from farm fields. Half of the breeds of many domestic animals have been lost. Wow. More than 90%. Here's some more data by them. They say here in one of the tables, 100 years of agricultural change, some trends and figures related to agro-biodiversity. So the first trend is that since the 1900s, some 75% of plant genetic diversity has been lost, as farmers worldwide have left their multiple local varieties and land races for genetically uniform high-yield varieties. Wow, that's pretty sad. Then they also say that 30% of livestock breeds are at risk of extinction. Holy crap. 6 breeds are lost each month. Wow, 6 breeds are lost each month. These are livestock breeds that took hundreds of years to kind of come into existence, and they're tailored to local regions. There used to be a cow species or cow variety breed, whatever you want to call it, for your local region that was good for the area, that was there, could handle the local diseases and pests, was kind of evolved, I guess, or bred to deal with the food that was there locally and all that. But we're having 6 breeds a month just go poof, go away. That's nuts. And then they also say that today 75% of the world's food is generated from only 12 plants and 5 animal species. Wow. Of the 4% of the 250,000 to 300,000 known edible plant species, wow, that's a lot. Only 150 to 200 are used by humans. Only 3, rice, maize, and wheat, so rice, corn, and wheat, contribute nearly 60% of calories and proteins obtained by humans from plants. Oof. Animals provide some 30% of human requirements for food and agriculture, and 12% of the world's population live almost entirely on products from ruminants. Whoa. Those 12% are lucky. I wish I could only be eating meat. I mean, I'm mostly already only eating meat, but you know what I mean. Yeah, those are some wild numbers. That's some wild info. I didn't read all of that when I was preparing for this video, for this podcast. Wow. I mean, yeah, if we continue to depend on that industrial ag system that we're on, like that we're depending on right now, if we continue on that or depend on the words, if we continue to depend on that to kind of feed us, the diversity of crop varieties will definitely continue to decrease. I mean, we already lost 90% in the last 100 years. That's mind-blowing, people. That's crazy. That's just wild. I think that also makes us more vulnerable, right? Because what if the few varieties that we're still growing today, those high-yield varieties, what if those get decimated by some plant like diseases and pests and whatnot? I mean, I know the banana is threatened by some disease right now, and it's like all one monoculture of bananas. It's all the same clone. So, you know, what are we going to do if all the bananas are gone? Come on, that would suck. We need some more heirloom varieties for bananas out there. So, I mean, these are just some of the benefits, you know, everything I just talked about. I could see from a victory garden movement, like if we made victory gardens cool again, I think we would see a lot of these benefits I just listed. And luckily, I think we are already seeing like this return of gardening being a cool thing with like community gardens, school gardens, etc. I feel like I'm seeing and hearing about it a lot more. But I think what we're missing is more people kind of growing food in their backyard at home. But even that, you know, luckily I think has seen a good increase. Like it's becoming more of a trend, and that's really awesome to see, in my opinion. And I hope, you know, we can get there. I really hope we can get there. And I think you and I and other people who care about quality food and being resilient, being self-sufficient, we will be the ones that have to rekindle this movement. You know, we'll have to rekindle a victory garden movement and introduce a common purpose. And by introducing this common purpose around growing your own food again, we aren't just planting seeds in the ground, right? We're like sowing seeds of autonomy, community spirit, better health, and environmental consciousness, and those are all great things. But there are a lot of people that are, you know, not as optimistic about it as me, I would say. And I accept that. And there's a lot of devil advocate positions to some of the benefits I just mentioned. You know, some folks might say that, sure, home gardens are nice, but they're not going to replace giant industrial farms. And yeah, they've got a point, but that's not really the goal here, you know. I think even small backyard gardens can really cut down how much we rely on monoculture farms and imported produce. And it's not about growing everything in the backyards, in people's backyards. You know, it's about growing something, right? Growing more of it, because we can offset some of that imported food and just industrially grown food. I mean, what was it during World War II? 40% of the nation's produce was coming from victory gardens. Pooh, crazy. So I get it, you know. I get the devil's advocate positions. You know, another one would be that maybe not everyone's got the space or time to start a garden, but that's again where those community gardens and shared plots can really help. They make it easier for people to grow food without needing this giant backyard or spending all their free time and money, like all their free time on having to learn everything through hard research. You know, they can just learn from a mentor who's their neighbor, for example, and then also use those person's tools, you know, obviously take care of them. But yeah, if we can have this like sharing going on there, I think it would be doable, and it's a way to get involved without doing it all yourself, you know? So anyways, maybe all this is just like this idealistic dream I have. But, the fact that these victory gardens and this greater self-sufficiency movement were already really mainstream 100 years ago. And honestly, throughout most of history, people were all focused on growing their own food or raising their own animals or foraging and hunting and fishing. The fact that was already mainstream at one point and doable and being done, makes me really optimistic. And it should make you optimistic too. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Throw your arguments my way. If you aren't as optimistic as me, I'd love to hear why. And just can't wait to hear what you think. All right, that's it for today. Until next time, my friend. Bye-bye.